Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're gonna be reviewing Nomeacuerdo by the band Proyecto Antimateria.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
You might not know this album or this band, but let me tell you all that today's video is definitely going to be an interesting one because I'm gonna ask some very interesting philosophical questions about how I make these reviews and what I do in cases like today. But anyway, before I get to that, here are some of my favorite bits from this album. So, let me ask you all a question, and put yourself in my shoes. What would you have done if you had to review an album and all the information you can find on it is what you've gathered from listening to the music itself and no more than that? Well, there really is no right answer for this type of question, but considering the fact that some of these albums that I review on this list are pretty obscure, sometimes, despite being kind of rare, we do get to see albums with little to no information about them. We've had that sort of recently with Plus 33, which only had about like a very short paragraph talking about who they actually are, and it really didn't give me much to work with. Or we've actually had a similar case like this with an album called Matkamien and Yeremin by the band Saima. Now, speaking of Saima, that Finnish band kinda just had it for me because while I didn't have much information about who they were, the album was so good within itself that I could talk about it at length without needing any information outside of that. But today's case, well, it is slightly different because this album, it's not a masterpiece by any sense of the imagination, and unfortunately it does have not a single trace of written information about it anywhere that I could find. And in some sense, yes, I do wish that I could have just skipped this album because really not that great music, I don't really have that much information about it, so why even do an episode about it? But unfortunately, listening to more than an hour of music is kind of just wasted if I decide not to make a video on it. So in the sake of time preservation, I will soldier on. So I will tell you what bit of information I was able to gather looking up online. So I did manage to find a Facebook page for this band, but it is criminally outdated by this point, and I don't see even any mentions of this album being, in existence. Seeing as this one came out in 2019, I believe their last post is like from 2017 or something like that. But anyway, I dug through that page and there was not a lot of information, but one thing I could find is a poster for one of the shows they were doing. Now that poster of course was in Spanish, which I could recognize, but I still couldn't know where in the world they were from. But fortunately that place had a name of the place they were attending in, so I googled that place up and I'm quite certain that what I've come to the conclusion is that they're from Mexico. Now I can't say that for sure, but I think I'm right. And another thing that I do know is that at least back then in the live performance they had 4 players. I don't know if that means that there are 4 active members on this album as well, but I might assume that there at least are, and I can infer that there are at least 3 because you can hear 3 instruments playing at once on this one. But with this basically ends all my information about this album. The only few things I can tell you further than that are the names for this band and the album. So the name of the band is Proyecto Antimateria, which means antimatter projection, and the name of this album is Nomeacuerdo, which means I don't remember. Now today's album is some sort of a progressive metal album. Now it does kind of reek from obscure, probably still in college cast of teens making making music together. Now, I'm not saying this to offend anyone, but in times you do start realizing and start getting the sense for what music by well-seasoned and veteran music players sounds like, as opposed to bands like this one. And this album features a basic lineup with only 3 instruments that I could gather, being of course the electric guitar, the drums, and a bass. I don't believe that there are keyboards on this one, as well as any other instrument, just because I couldn't hear them. Of course, it's not factually checked, so I might be wrong on that, although I believe I am not. But what I've just mentioned is probably the first flaw, the major flaw of this album, and that's the uninclusion or inclusion of any exotic instruments. Now that can range of course from the usual keyboards to some better, more interesting things. Now, while it's not necessary for bands to of course have more than the usual lineup of instruments that you usually find in rock bands, I do think that it could have helped, especially when making progressive music. And you know what? If you don't have anyone that knows how to play any other instrument, your only saving grace really is just being very, very good at what you're playing, which is unfortunately not the case with today's album. But this band, despite it all, marches forth into their limited sonic realm and tries to do the best with what they've got. And of course, they fail in doing so. Is there any diversity in this album? There's zero. Can I distinct one song from the other? No, nada, nothing like that. This album is just basically an hour and about I think 7 minutes of pure staleness. But I do feel like I have to admit one thing, and that's the fact that I didn't really suffer through each of these tracks, or even any of these tracks. Honestly, if a friend came up to me and told me, you know what, you gotta listen to this particular song, and gave me one of the songs from this album, I'd listen to it, I'd be underwhelmed, but I wouldn't suffer through it. I wouldn't think that it's bad music. The music of this album turns bad when you compile it all together into more than an hour's worth of music, and sitting from front to back and listening to this entire thing is just the most boring of things to do. Basically, I've zoned out from this entire album most of the time. I'm actually even surprised that I had more than one favorite bit from this album, because in all honesty, I don't think it was worth it. So yeah, all in all, this is pretty much an album that I would describe as useless, and if this band did want to continue on and make more music, they would have to do a quick change of pace in either direction, either going into the non-progressive zone and creating, just plain rock music like everyone else does and maybe find some success with that, or get their game up and do better progressive rock music. But as it stands right now, forgettable band, don't know who recommended them, but yeah. So this is a pretty odd cover. It probably has something to do with Mexican heritage or something like that I just don't get, but I don't know anything about crocodiles. And despite this one being kind of very much low effort, I can say that I like it. I don't know, it's something about those red alligators that give me the sense of the SCP-939, something that probably 99% of the people watching this video have no idea what that means, but it just makes me a bit of nostalgic for browsing in the internet back in 2014. And other than that, the composition is fine on here. I guess it is balanced. I don't think that there's anything appealing about this cover, but at the same time, much like the music inherently, it's not bad as well. So as I said, I am pretty much indifferent towards the individual tracks on this album, but this album as a whole is just more disdainful for me, and thus it will be receiving a rating of 4 out of 10. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to Liquid Tension Experiment 2, of course, by Liquid Tension Experiment. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Warner, Mr. Kings, and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my About page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.